And there it is. Donald Trump's supposed whataboutism, in fact, proven correct. In 2017, he was asked about the taking down of certain Confederate statues. And he said, what's next? George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. And in a single cry, the media all said, whataboutism. Taking down Confederate statues has nothing to do with the founding fathers. We're not going to take them down. I mean, not necessarily, right? And here we are. The image displayed on your screen, for those that are watching, is George Washington, a statue of him at least, torn down, vandalized with graffiti all over him. Someone wrote 1619 on the statue they destroyed. Now, for those that for some reason aren't aware, maybe you're not from this country, George Washington may be one of the most important founding fathers. He was the first president of the United States. Now, personally, I think when they tore down Thomas Jefferson, that was a bit more shocking. But let me tell you, people tearing down statues could be random acts of violence. Whatever is going on is much deeper than that. The 1619 spray painted on that statue was a reference to the New York Times 1619 project, which claims the United States was a slaveocracy and the Revolutionary War was fought to save slavery. And this is just not true. The 1619 project is being widely disputed, yet still the New York Times claims it's all true, huh? And this ideology infects the minds of certain people who go around and destroy images, statues, things that honor our founding fathers. This is an attack at the core of what this country is. And I think it's rather terrifying. But what's more terrifying is that in New York City, they're calling for Jefferson to be removed from the city council, actually taking down the statues, removing paintings and other images that represent the history of our country, history that wasn't always perfect. You may not think you're involved, but the war is happening. And right now, it's mostly ideological. There have been bouts of physical conflict, and typically when it involves regular people, things don't go too well for the leftist ideologues. But the media has been just 2 steps behind the entire time. Every single time one of these ideologues takes an extremist action, the media pretends like it'll just end here. That's it. But it just keeps getting worse. And now we're seeing 2 sets of laws. There's inequality under the law. That if you want to go to church, you can't do it. New York says no. That Donald Trump wants to hold a rally in Tulsa, and they argue that he can't do it because people will get sick. And they've actually declared a civil emergency to try and stop Donald Trump's rally. Yet at the same time, in New York City, Black Lives Matter protests go unabated. The city just ignores this. Andrew Cuomo himself said he would not allow a large political rally to occur in his state. Donald Trump wouldn't be allowed to do it. Yet at the same time, only a few days earlier, thousands of people held a large political rally. So why is it allowed? Because there is a war going on. You're just probably not involved. While you sit around and watch videos like this, and I sit around complaining about it, they're destroying images of our founding fathers. They are tearing at the core of what this country is. They are changing history, as you can see with the 1619 written on the statue. And I can imagine this will only end up with a massive civil conflict of some sort in the physical space. While this is all happening, where are the Republican politicians to actually stand up and do something about it? Apparently nowhere to be found. In fact, many conservative commentators are freaking out, to say the least, complaining that Republicans have done nothing to condemn this. I'm just going to tell you right now. Let me just express the absurdity of all of us sitting here, not a peep from a politician, to condemn the destruction of our earliest presidents, the founding fathers, the drafter of the Declaration of Independence, the people who set forth this great nation. They're being destroyed. And Democrats in New York City are agreeing with it and calling for more. And Republicans are doing nothing. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'll tell you what. But I can certainly imagine there are a lot of people who love waving that American flag who are not going to sit around for it. And I can only imagine things will get worse from here. People aren't speaking up. And because they're not, people are getting fired from their jobs. And we are entering now a very, very dark reality. There's a man in Atlanta who was doing his job as a cop, and a tragedy unfolded. The person he was trying to arrest, a man named Rayshard Brooks, resisted, stole a taser, fired it at him, and in self-defense, he fired back, and Rayshard lost his life. It is a horrifying story, and we wish it didn't happen. The mother of the police officer has just been fired. We are entering straight-up Soviet territory, where the family members must be punished because of where our culture is going. So what will happen? Will people now stand up and defend Donald Trump in the face of all this? I honestly don't know. I've seen some people say that Trump must be reelected at all costs because the alternative is worse. But I'm seeing many conservatives and Trump supporters say Trump is too weak and he's not getting the job done. So what's the alternative? That's it. The war is lost. The fringe authoritarian left takes over, punishes family members, destroys statues, erases our history. And now I bring you to the absolute worst thing I have heard. Tucker Carlson mentioned this the other night. Democrats in California have approved a measure to revoke civil rights legislation in California to allow discrimination based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. It's done. Now, the California Senate has to approve of it, and it may actually get ratified, I believe, this coming November. But this would now allow discrimination based on race to reemerge in this country. So it's all being torn apart. Will American patriots stand up and defend the progress of our nation and its founders? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe regular Americans will just sit back and watch it all happen, and then it just happens. Or maybe it'll get to the point where people finally snap. I honestly don't know. But let's do this. Opening rant done. Let's take a look at what's going on with this story. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. There is a P.O. box if you'd like to send things to me. But the most important thing you can do is just share this video. Maybe there's still people in this country who care about the founders of this country. I know I do. The easiest way to put it, set forth this great nation. There's a lot of things wrong with America. We've fixed many of those problems, and we can continue to fix them to this day. To destroy images of our founding fathers is nightmarish. They want to erase our culture, and they're erasing civil rights. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I won't even waste your time. They've quite literally proposed a ballot measure to repeal a law which prohibits the state considering race, sex, color, ethnicity, and national origin in the operation of public employment, education, and public contracting. They are literally striking through a provision that says they shall not discriminate. I'll try and tell you why to the best of my abilities to break down their logic here, but it's nightmarish to me. Okay. So if you think this stuff is important, please consider sharing this so people can maybe hear it. Now, if you just want to watch, hit the subscribe button, the like button, the notification bell. Let's read the news. George Washington statue toppled by protesters in Portland, Oregon. I mean, that's really the news. They say it's about racial justice. George Washington was a slave owner. And mind you, he was not the most progressive of people, not even for his time. Thomas Jefferson was, and they were both slave owners. Many other founding fathers were. In fact, many of these founding fathers, to the best of our understanding, opposed slavery and worked towards ending it. But at the time, it was different, and various countries did very horrible things. I will not look back on that history of our history in that regard with anything but disdain and horror that it could have been. But I can look at the things they set forth and where we've come to this day. It took a long time to get these civil rights, and we've accomplished it. But it's Democrats in New York City who want to destroy the statue of Jefferson, remove it. And it's Democrats in California who want to revoke civil rights legislation. So I don't know what else to tell you. I'm looking at the founding fathers who helped create a framework for a country that guaranteed rights for all. Not initially, but soon, but it eventually happened. And maybe not soon enough, definitely not soon enough, but we made it. And we need to keep fighting to make sure it gets better. And now we're witnessing people who want to make sure it gets worse. And they want to erase the people who made that all possible. I want to bring you back in time to 2017. Donald Trump was right. I know many people don't want to hear it. They called it a slippery slope or whataboutism, but he was completely correct. Here's the quote. He said, "So this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? Jefferson was a major slave owner. Are we going to take down his statue?" The answer was yes. They literally did. Protesters pulled down Thomas Jefferson in front of a Portland high school. Now, I understand these are just 2 statues out of many across the country, but it's beginning. At a couple schools in Berkeley are renaming their schools from Washington and Jefferson to something else. Here's what they said. They said he used his standard rhetorical technique, whataboutism. And they asked, so what about them? Must they all go? Not necessarily, because they're not all the same, NPR said in 2017. Now, 3 years on, no, they must go. It's not just some random protesters tearing this stuff down. Democrats in the New York City Council called for Thomas Jefferson to be removed. New York City? This is not the West Coast. This is not the fringe crazies. This is one of our biggest cities saying they want to remove the image of Jefferson, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. This country, everything they claim about it in the 1619 Project was a remnant of the British colonies and other colonies of other European powers. And there was a change in the idea as to how this country should be run, that we should not bend the knee to a monarch, that we should be free to govern ourselves because we were all created equal. Unfortunately, this idea was a bit ahead of the market, to put it lightly. People at that time still had extremely prejudicial views, extremely, to say the least, and atrocities were rampant around the world. Yet they had an idea that all people were created equal. Now they said all men, mind you, but you can argue the semantics of it. Everyone was equal because they were endowed with God-given inalienable rights. Now it wasn't perfect because people were still enslaved, and we recognize how horrifying that was. And today is Juneteenth. It's a holiday recognizing the end of these atrocities. I will 100% say the entire institution from its inception until its destruction, and even to this day where it exists in other countries like Libya, it is an atrocity. Individuals are free. I believe 100% in liberty. And I will absolutely criticize all of the founding fathers for their being slave owners. But we have to look back and make sure that we don't throw out all of the good simply because of the bad. Now, there are some people in history who had some good, but overwhelmingly bad. And I think for the most part, we can throw that out because these are people who are not creating a better world. They were making the world worse. The argument for Thomas Jefferson and George Washington is that although they did horrible things, they were making the world better. And from their ideas, we moved towards freedom and liberty for all and civil rights and the right to vote and women's suffrage. And today we continue to expand these rights. Why, in fact, just recently, the Supreme Court ruled that you cannot discriminate against you can't discriminate against someone in employment on the basis of their gender identity or orientation. We continue to make strides that progressives should be proud of. Instead, they want to erase the men who helped make that possible. That, to me, is nightmarish and Orwellian. The 1619 Project, which you saw spray painted on the statue, is widely disputed. And even if it isn't, we can criticize the horrors of slavery. Absolutely. Listen, I've had a conversation with people about this a long time, over a long period of time, for a long time, particularly during Occupy Wall Street. And I thought it was interesting because there's a good reason why I love this country and believe in liberty. And it's also become a meme when I mention that I come from I'm a second generation mixed race individual. My family had to fight for civil rights and flee over the laws that existed. And mind you, there's a reason why my ancestors fled the countries they came from. I'm part Korean, and atrocities were committed well into World War II, and I'm not going to get into the details of it. So yes, I completely understand civil rights. And even upon making it to this country, my family was still subjected to horrifying laws that I think are disgusting. And guess what? We won. We won, man. America is awesome. We stood up for what we believed in, and because of it, because of the actions of my grandparents and my parents, I got to grow up in a free country where I've been able to succeed. And I look back at all those really awful things and I think, I won. We all did. And we're getting better and better every day. Please don't erase our history. There's a reason why my ancestors dreamed of coming to this country, facing all of the horrifying things that happened where they came from. They said, with a glimmer of hope in their eyes, we will one day make it to America where we can be free. And they did. And I wonder what my great-grandparents would think if they saw where I was today and the rest of my extended family members, many of whom I don't even know. I'm sure they'd be very proud that they made it to a country, whether successful or not, they made it to a country that fought for freedom. And they'd probably be shocked to see, Loving v. Virginia or the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which brings me now to what I consider to be another atrocity. And I mean this. California Repeal Proposition 209 Affirmative Action Amendment. What does that title mean? Affirmative Action Amendment. I honestly don't know. I have no idea what that means. Why is affirmative action in the title of this bill? Seems to me like a Trojan horse. Because when I try explaining to people why this scares me, they just say, but affirmative action is a good thing. Affirmative action is a good thing. Tell that to all of the poor Asian kids who grew up in the ghetto who are being told they can't go to a college because of the way they look. No, it's not a good thing. There are some good things about it for sure. I mean that. But for the most part, I think it's institutional racism. But look at the language of this bill. This proposal to repeal Proposition 209 has nothing to do with affirmative action. Though the media would tell you otherwise, I just don't see it. Maybe they're going to propose a new bit of legislation to fix what they're destroying, but I really don't see it. The measure would repeal Section 31 of Article 1 of the California Constitution. The following struck-through text would be repealed. Let me read you the principal provision that says, "The state shall not discriminate against or grant preferential treatment to any individual or group on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in the operation of public employment, public education, or public contracting." They then go on to make more legalese statements, but let me just tell you what this is. Nowhere in this measure does it mention anything about affirmative action. It doesn't say the changes would remove this section, but then also grant the ability to. The section doesn't amend this. The provision doesn't amend this section to simply say you can't discriminate on the basis of these characteristics except for universities. It literally just says that they will not discriminate against someone on the basis of race, and they're removing it. That's it. That is it. So I'll tell you what's happened so far when I saw this. This was passed, I believe, by the Democrats in California on June 10th by a vote of 60-14. It must now pass the state legislature, pass the state assembly. And it may actually be ratified, I believe, in November. It was passed on June 10th. I contacted several of my progressive friends, and I sent them this from Ballotpedia, explaining what the measure, exactly what it is. Some of them couldn't understand it at all, and they just said, but affirmative action is a good thing. And I said, where in this does it mention they are doing this for affirmative action? Where in this do they amend the law to add a provision allowing them to, admit students to universities on the basis of certain characteristics? It doesn't. It literally just removes California's civil rights legislation. And the response I got from many of my progressive friends was, I don't understand. This doesn't make sense. This seems weird. You're right. It does seem weird, doesn't it? Too many of the people that I know who are progressive don't know what's going on. They have told me repeatedly, no one's going to tear down Washington or Jefferson. And then it happened. They told me repeatedly, listen, no one's going to, these people aren't going to actually start discriminating against people. They're just trying to, even the playing field. Now California is actually trying to repeal civil rights legislation. They told me that wouldn't happen. They told me nobody would ban art. They just wanted to ban hate speech. Now they're literally banning art, movies. Just generally art in all its forms. Cards from the Magic the Gathering card game, which I've been playing since I was a kid, have been deemed racist and must be removed. They're putting tags in front of movies saying this movie is racist. They told me banning hate speech just meant stopping the nasty, evil white supremacists. And now here we are. They said it was a slippery slope. And now I am literally looking at legislation that has passed in California, not completely, just the assembly, that would allow them the right to discriminate on the basis of race, sex, national origin, etc. They told me none of this would happen. Well, here we go. Here it is. Let me tell you about what we're facing. They're destroying our founding fathers. They're repealing civil rights legislation, and they're doing it under the guise of civil rights. That's the scariest thing to me. There was a Republican named Steve King, and he was considered to be white nationalist and racist, and he lost his primary. I believe he did. But he was kicked off of every committee by every Republican. They rejected him. So here's what I see. I have political disagreements on certain issues pertaining to taxes and pro-life versus choice. But these are conversations over morals and ethics. I have an agreement with conservatives on the issues of civil rights. The left today has become overtly identitarian. They keep claiming they're not racist, but what do I hear? When I go to Trump rallies, I don't hear any racism. I don't. I've been to a ton of them. I don't agree with Trump's attitude, behavior, or some of his policies. When I go to protests from the left, what do I hear? I hear tons of racial slurs, not an exaggeration. In Oregon, far left activists were screaming racial slurs at police and ICE agents. Just recently, at one of the Black Lives Matter protests, when a young woman was being arrested in a video, you can hear some of the activists being arrested screaming racial slurs at the police. That's what I hear from them. They claim to be anti-racist, but it's, in my opinion, the perfect cover to then repeal civil rights legislation. Maybe I'm getting this wrong. Hey, I can't believe it. I got to be honest. I really can't believe it. I have read through this. I have looked it up, and I can't understand how this is supposed to be a good thing or in any way helps affirmative action. They just put it in the title. And all of a sudden now I see the left supporting it. That's their argument. The comments about repealing the civil rights legislation is mostly about affirmative action. So again, maybe I'm getting it wrong because I got to be honest. I really can't believe that's what's happening, but that's what appears to be happening. And it wasn't supposed to be happening. But let me show you how far this really goes. Andrew Cuomo was asked, would he allow a large political rally in New York? To which he said no. Anderson Cooper said, in reference to Donald Trump's Tulsa rally, would you allow a large political rally in New York in these circumstances in this time? And Cuomo said, no, look, the president's position all along has been a political position. His position was yada, yada. Cuomo said no, he wouldn't allow Trump to have this kind of rally. Let me show you an image. Historic marches in Boston and NYC say Black trans lives matter. And they definitely do. I 100% respect the protests. My issue is not with the protesters at all. I think people standing up for what they believe in is a powerful and important thing. So my respect to all the protesters. I wish more people would stand up for what they believed in. Destroying statues is not a protest. That's violent insurrection. That's vandalism and property destruction. Andrew Cuomo saying he will enforce laws against Trump, but not against these protesters, has nothing to do with these protesters and everything to do with Andrew Cuomo, a Democrat who views the law as something he can use for his political ends, his political tribe. And that's what's happening. You see, these protests have happened across the country. And now, when Donald Trump wants to have a rally, at a time when they're saying these protests are a good thing, in fact, these governors are going out and marching, Tulsa mayor declares civil emergency ahead of Trump rally. Stragglers face arrest. It's not an exaggeration. Curfew in effect for downtown Tulsa. They've kicked everybody out. They told them they couldn't be there. They'd be arrested. And guess what? These Trump supporters got up and walked away calmly and easily. And that's why I fear for what's to come next. You know, when I try talking to people about these issues, particularly white progressives, they don't understand the concerns I would have coming from a family where I got to grow up hearing stories about how they had to flee like a dozen different states when people found out that they were actually in a mixed race relationship, which was illegal. I got to grow up hearing about that. And I got to grow up thinking to myself, man, isn't it cool that, you know, we're headed towards this beautiful future? I'm a big fan of Star Trek. And Star Trek, the original show, was one of the first to show an interracial kiss. So I grew up hearing these great things we've done and how great everything is getting. I grow up having to hear about some bad things that, you know, our founding fathers were involved in, of course, because we've evolved and we've learned from these mistakes. But I got to hear about the ideas they had and how brilliant they were and how they created one of the freest and greatest nations on the planet. And now I get to sit here and watch as those stories I was told start to become reality again. The horrifying stories about racial pretext for law. The California Democrats are starting to make a reality again. And the horror stories that I was told from when I was growing up that didn't really matter to me because I grew up in a free country, so it didn't really mean anything. I'm now worried I'll get to experience that. The sad things, the things that I figured, you know, look, I imagined my grandparents, great-grandparents being like very proud from where they came from to where I am today. And now I can only imagine what they'd be thinking if they were here, worried that they wouldn't actually have provided me a better future, that all the fighting they did wasn't enough. And that's what I'm watching happening. So I'll tell you what I see. I see Trump supporters show up for a rally, 800,000 plus nearly 1 million tickets. And then when the police come and say, curfew, go or else, they say, you got it, buddy, and they walk away. They won't stand up for their ideas. They won't stand up in the face of tens of thousands of people protesting for their ideology and being allowed to do it. They won't plant themselves like a tree and say, no, you move. Marvel apparently apologized because they showed a still from a video game where Captain America, there was a statue of Captain America. And he was the one in the comic who said, no, you move. These protesters refused to back down. There was a man who worked for Taco Bell who was wearing a Black Lives Matter mask and they told him he couldn't wear it. So he refused. He got fired. He stood up for himself. And now the company has backed down and said you can wear these masks. Trump supporters were told to clear out or face arrest, and they cleared out and said, okay. They're tearing down statues of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Where are the Republicans to stand up and defend this? I don't know. Where are the Republicans in New York? I guess they don't exist. Now the Democrats are calling for Jefferson to be removed. So that's what worries me. That's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that the horror stories of the past are coming back, that the far left is getting their wish, that they're probably not even really far left. I don't know what they are, but they're absolutely identitarian. I'm worried when I see friends of mine from several years now posting overt white identitarian content. And I'm not talking about right wing. I'm talking about the far left. I'm talking about people that I've known for a long time who have become overtly identitarian. They're making posts now in the name of social justice, advising their white identity groups what to do. And that is scary. It's all the same thing to me. And I'm worried about what the future has to hold. What California is doing, repealing the civil rights legislation, will likely pass through. And to be honest, there are many other states that already allow this. And we've already seen several universities win the right to discriminate on the basis of race. But this bill in California is talking about the state itself. So what's to stop these groups now from discriminating on the basis of race? It's a world I don't want to live in, and we're going to get to. Because in the end, what do we get? I don't know. For the most part, people just they back down. I'm really surprised, to say the least, when I saw a video of all the Trump supporters clearing out. Because I think about the protesters who yelled at the cops and fought with them, and the cops retreated, and now they control a 6-block radius in Seattle. And then I see Trump supporters show up, and the cops walk up and say, time to go. And they say, you got it, buddy. And they walk right away, and they claim nothing. Trump will lose because there's no one really standing up for anything. And that means in the end, so will I. I guess you can say I should be doing more. Fair. Because what do any of these real, civil libertarians do other than talk about it? I don't know what else you can do. All I'm really saying is you speak up, to be honest. Maybe that's it. Talk about it. Because when this guy got fired from his job at Taco Bell, he refused to back down, and they're apparently offering him his job back. You don't have to do what the left does. I actually would recommend against it. The violence and destruction is horrifying and wrong. But we see what happens in New Mexico when a guy shows up to defend the statue. They threaten him, they beat him, they pull out weapons, and then he's forced to defend himself, and he gets arrested for it. The trends, I think, are fairly obvious. And because of these trends, I think we're headed towards dark times. I'm not confident things will work out well. Maybe the regular people, like we saw in Philadelphia, who stood up and defended the statue of Christopher Columbus, will come out and they'll make a stand against this. But I don't think so. I think these smaller communities will just say, stay out of my town and leave me alone. And at a federal level, our major corporations, our major politicians will just bend the knee and accept all of this. And what happens when we erase people like Thomas Jefferson, a person who wrote extensively about defending freedom and liberty? You get rid of him, you're not going to have any heroes to look up to who wanted to defend freedom and liberty. They're going to be replaced with other people who believe in authoritarianism and identitarianism and racial pretext in law. There you go. Those are the horrors that I think we are nearing. I guess we'll just carry on like we normally do. And like I always say, we'll just see what happens. But I don't know. Sometimes I have hope. Sometimes I don't. It kind of changes based on the news. But I just watched them tear down a statue of George Washington. And you'd think that once they did that, every single politician, from Democrat to Republican to the president, would issue a public statement condemning this action. But they said nothing. Have any of them said anything about Jefferson? Maybe. But it's not in the news. The news doesn't care. They'll defend these people. The only person I heard talk about California trying to repeal civil rights legislation was Tucker Carlson. Where's the rest of our media? Nowhere to be found. Well, I hope you're in for a wild ride, because I think we're in for it. The next segment's coming up at 6 p.m. at youtube.com/TimCastNews. It is a different channel, and I'll see you all then.